There comes a moment when you must decide, who am I? Am I someone who bends under the weight of being unappreciated? Or am I someone who recognizes my own worth and refuses to be a background character in someone else's life? You see, energy flows where attention goes. If you constantly pour into someone who does not reciprocate, you are reinforcing their illusion that your presence is permanent, that they can pull away and you will still be there, that no matter how much they neglect you, you will remain. But today, that illusion ends. Familiarity is a dangerous comfort. It makes people forget the value of what they have. They assume you will always be there because, well, you always have been. But what happens when you break that pattern? What happens when you remove yourself from the equation? The answer is simple. They are forced to feel your absence. They are forced to wake up. Understand this: your value is not determined by how much you give. Your value is determined by what you allow. The moment you shift your standards, the moment you refuse to be taken for granted, the world around you must adjust. Detachment is your power. The day you decide that you do not need their validation to feel whole is the day you reclaim control. You do not beg for respect. You do not demand it. You become it. You embody it. And when you do that, something extraordinary happens. Their perception of you changes. People only respect what they fear losing. When you step back, when you pull away, when you prioritize yourself, they are forced to see the space you once filled. And that space is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of everything you once brought to their life. So today you make a choice. You stop feeding the old story. You stop showing up in the same way for people who refuse to see you. Instead, you become unavailable to anything that does not honor you. You step into your power, not with anger, not with resentment, but with the quiet, unwavering strength of someone who knows their worth. Because when you know your worth, you don't have to teach them with words. You teach them with distance. And that distance, that is the lesson they will never forget. Energy is currency. Where you spend it determines the quality of your life. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every action you take sends a signal, both to the people around you and to the universe itself. When you constantly give your energy to someone who does not reciprocate, you are making an unspoken statement. I accept this imbalance. I allow this dynamic. But the truth is, the more you pour into someone who doesn't appreciate it, the more you deplete yourself. Your energy becomes diluted in a space where it is neither valued nor acknowledged. And what happens when you keep giving without receiving? You send the message that your presence requires no effort, no gratitude, no reciprocation. But imagine if you shifted that energy. Imagine if, instead of focusing on their lack of appreciation, you turned your attention inward. What if, rather than waiting for them to notice you, you noticed yourself? The moment you reclaim your focus, everything changes. When you stop directing your energy towards someone who takes you for granted, they feel it. They may not understand it at first, but they will sense the shift. And in that shift, they are forced to confront a reality they never prepared for, the reality of your absence. Your attention is powerful. It is the difference between feeling invisible and being recognized. If you keep feeding a dynamic that does not serve you, you only make it stronger. But if you withdraw your attention, if you redirect that energy toward your own growth, self-worth, and fulfillment, you begin to shift the entire equation. Suddenly, you are no longer the one chasing appreciation. You become the one who is appreciated, because nothing is more valuable than what is no longer easily accessible. Familiarity is a double-edged sword. It breeds comfort, but it also breeds complacency. When someone becomes too accustomed to your presence, they stop seeing it as a privilege and start treating it as a given. They assume you will always be there, always understanding, always forgiving, always available, and that assumption is what allows them to take you for granted. This cycle continues because you have unknowingly conditioned them to expect your consistency, no matter how they treat you. You've taught them through repetition that they can withdraw their effort without consequence, that your kindness does not require acknowledgement, that your love, support, or patience will remain whether they cherish it or neglect it. But what happens when you interrupt that pattern? What happens when you stop showing up in the same way? At first, they might not notice. Then they might feel unsettled, and finally, they will have to face the reality they never considered. That you are not an infinite resource, that your presence is not a right but a privilege, and that privileges can be lost. Breaking this cycle does not require confrontation. It does not require anger. It requires change. A shift in how you respond, a shift in where you place your energy, a shift in the level of access you allow. It is in that shift that the lesson is learned. Because people only wake up to what they've taken for granted when it is no longer effortlessly available. And so the question is not whether they will appreciate you when you pull away. The question is whether you will value yourself enough to step back and allow them to feel the weight of your absence. You teach people how to treat you by what you accept, by what you tolerate, and by what you reinforce. If you consistently lower your standards to accommodate someone who does not meet you at your level, you are sending a message, not just to them, but to yourself, that your value is negotiable, that your worth is something to be bargained with, something to be placed second to someone else's convenience. But the truth is, no one will ever respect a value that you do not enforce. You cannot expect someone to cherish you when you continue to show up for them after they have proven they do not deserve that level of access. Every time you excuse mistreatment, every time you downplay your own needs, every time you stay silent when you should speak up, you are setting the standard for how others will engage with you. Raising your standards is not about demanding more from others. It's about demanding more from yourself. It's about deciding that you will no longer participate in dynamics that leave you feeling unseen, unappreciated, or unfulfilled. It's about understanding that true respect does not come from asking someone to value you. It comes from walking away when they don't. The moment you establish and uphold new standards, something powerful happens. The people around you must either rise to meet them or fall away. And those who fall away were never meant to stay in the first place. Your standards are a filter that separate those who truly see your worth from those who are only benefiting from your lack of boundaries. So if you want to change how you are treated, change what you allow. If you want to be valued, stop making yourself available to those who refuse to recognize your worth. Because the moment you make the decision to no longer settle, the world around you will have no choice but to adjust. Attachment keeps you stuck. It keeps you emotionally invested in situations that no longer serve you, in people who do not appreciate you, and in outcomes that drain your energy. When you are attached, you are tethered, you react, you overthink, you seek validation, you chase clarity where none will be given. But when you detach, you reclaim your power. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop begging. It means you no longer place your peace in the hands of someone else's recognition. It means you are no longer controlled by the fear of losing something that does not nourish you. Because the truth is, when someone knows you are dependent on their validation, they will always hold the power. They will take their time, test your limits, and assume that no matter what, you will remain. But the moment you detach, everything shifts. You are no longer waiting for an apology that may never come. You are no longer hoping for someone to wake up and realize your worth. You are no longer investing your energy in convincing someone to treat you the way you deserve. Instead, you become rooted in yourself. You become someone who chooses themselves, who values their own peace over the chaos of someone else's inconsistency. Detachment forces people to confront the reality of your absence. It forces them to question what they so easily took for granted. It shifts the dynamic, because now they are no longer in control of your emotions, you are. And that is where true power lies. Not in revenge, not in resentment, but in the quiet, unwavering decision to no longer be affected by what once had the ability to shake you. So let them wonder, let them feel the silence, let them sit with the absence of your energy. Because the greatest shift happens when you stop proving your worth and start acting like you already know it. People see you the way you have allowed them to see you. Their perception of you is shaped by the role you've played, the behaviors you've accepted, and the way you have consistently shown up in their life. If they take you for granted, it's because in some way they believe they can. If they assume you will always be there, it's because you have never shown them otherwise. But the good news is, just as perceptions are formed, they can also be rewired. The moment you stop operating within the expectations they have built around you, they are forced to reevaluate who you are. When you stop answering every call, when you stop making yourself endlessly available, when you stop tolerating what you once ignored, their mental blueprint of you begins to shift. Suddenly, they no longer have the same certainty that you will always be there, waiting. They no longer have the same confidence that they can treat you as an afterthought without consequence. This shift does not require words, it requires action. People do not believe what you say, they believe what you show them. And the only way to rewire their perception is to disrupt the pattern they have grown comfortable with. If they have categorized you as the person who will always be understanding, always forgiving, always sacrificing, then it is time to introduce a new version of yourself. A version that prioritizes self-respect over approval. A version that no longer operates from a place of lack, but from a place of abundance. When you change, they must change. The way they engage with you, they must either rise to meet you at this new level or fall away because they can no longer function in a dynamic where you are no longer their convenience. And either outcome is a win. Because the moment you take control of how you are perceived, you stop being an option and start becoming a presence that commands respect. The version of you that allowed yourself to be taken for granted is no longer the version that exists. The patterns that kept you stuck, the excuses you made for others, the times you ignored your own needs to accommodate someone else, those belong to an old story. And if you want a different outcome, you must become unavailable to the person you used to be in that story. Every time you respond the same way, every time you go back to a situation that disrespected you, every time you tolerate what you swore you wouldn't, you are reopening a chapter that should have ended. The people who took you for granted are not operating on what they assume about you now. They are operating on who you have always been to them. And until you remove yourself from that outdated version, they will continue engaging with you the same way. Becoming unavailable to the old story does not mean explaining yourself. It does not mean announcing your change or demanding acknowledgement. It means silently, powerfully shifting your actions. It means no longer engaging in conversations that diminish you, no longer justifying your worth, no longer proving your value to people who should have recognized it in the first place. This transformation is not for them. It is for you. Because the moment you stop feeding the cycle has no choice but to break, and in that break, a new story begins. One where you are no longer waiting to be chosen, but are choosing yourself. One where you are no longer hoping to be seen, but are walking away from anyone who refuses to see you. One where your energy is no longer spent trying to convince someone to appreciate you, but is instead invested in the spaces and people who already do. The old version of you kept waiting, kept giving, kept hoping. The new version of you understands that your value does not need validation. And once you make the decision to become unavailable to what no longer serves you, you will never have to teach someone your worth again, because they will feel the loss. And in that absence, they will learn the lesson that words could never teach. Teach him the cost of taking you for granted. There comes a moment in life when you must decide, do you continue being overlooked, undervalued, and unappreciated, or do you reclaim your worth? Not by demanding it, not by pleading for it, but by becoming unavailable to anyone who refuses to see it. Energy flows where attention goes. If you constantly pour into someone who does not reciprocate, you are reinforcing their belief that your presence is guaranteed, that no matter what, you will always be there, that your love, patience, and effort require no recognition. But the truth is, when you shift your focus inward, when you take back your energy, you stop being a convenience and start becoming a presence they cannot ignore. People take you for granted because they have become too comfortable with your consistency. They assume you will always answer, always understand, always give one more chance. They have built an expectation that no matter how they treat you, you will stay. But what happens when you break that cycle? When you stop engaging in the same way? When you remove the security they once had in your presence? The answer is simple. They are forced to feel your absence, and in that absence, they learn the lesson that words could never teach. Your value is not determined by how much you give, it is determined by what you allow. If you accept less than you deserve, you invite more of the same. If you keep showing up for people who do not show up for you, you are teaching them that your worth is negotiable. But the moment you raise your standards, the moment you decide you will no longer tolerate being taken for granted, the world around you, people must either rise to meet you or they must watch you walk away. And either way, you win. Detachment is your greatest power. When you are no longer emotionally dependent on someone else's validation, you take back control. You do not chase, you do not explain, you do not beg for respect, you embody it. And the moment you detach from the need to prove your worth, you force them to confront the reality of losing you. Because here's the truth, people only value what they believe they might lose. When you change, when you stop responding the way they expect, when you no longer participate in their old version of you, they must rewire their perception. They must see you in a new light. And in that moment, they realize, maybe too late, that what they once dismissed was actually irreplaceable. But this lesson is not for them. It is for you. You do not transform to teach them a lesson. You transform because you refuse to keep living the same story. You become unavailable to anything that does not honor you. You step into a version of yourself that no longer waits to be appreciated, but instead walks away from anyone who fails to do so. And when you make that shift, you will never have to teach someone your worth again. Because the moment they feel your absence, they will understand what they lost. And in that understanding, the cost of taking you for granted will become a lesson they will never forget.